Hello and welcome. I'm Karan, and today I'm joined by a very special guest from the United States of America, Dr. J. Scott Jordan, professor at Illinois State University, who is well known for his work on the wild systems theory, which has revolutionized the way we perceive meaning,
Yeah.
coherence, and human intention. So, thank you very much for joining me on this conversation, Dr. Jordan. It's always wonderful to have you and for the conversation.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure to get to meet you last spring, and I look forward to the conversation.
Certainly. Davis, in the recent times, we have seen that everything in and around America is changing at a very fast speed. The values,
Yeah.
the significance that America once held in the world is seemingly becoming more and more concerning for the people in the US and around the world because of the recent actions that has been taken, including the aggressive crackdown of ICE in Minneapolis, Minnesota,
Yes.
and how the geopolitical equation is changing, how the U.S. Current administration of U.S. is treating its allies, and how the economy is
Right.
doing, how the Federal Reserve's freedom is in question, and more importantly, how the perception of the world is changing when it comes to the United States of America. And to discuss this, we have with us Dr. Jordan. And now, the goal of this conversation is not to give you the expert opinion or to create a sense of panic or sensationalism, but to have a conversation to give you a fair sense of idea of what's happening in the United States from the eyes of an individual who is there and who can give us a better understanding of the situation. Am I right, Dr. Jordan?
No, I appreciate you saying that.
So, Dr. Jordan, let me begin by shifting the focus to the IC struggle in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this straight. When you heard about the news of killing of Rene Good and Alex Pretty, the U.S. citizens, without any criminal record, what was your reaction? What was the first thought that came to your mind when you heard this news? Unfortunate headline.
Um, Beginning of the end.
Mhm.
Um, the unlawful shooting of these two citizens is diagnostic, as we talked about a little earlier, diagnostic of an executive branch that realizes that um, all it has to do is ignore the orders of the judicial branch. And if it ignores those orders and goes ahead and does things the way it, quote unquote, wants to do them, then how do they get stopped? Right.
You mentioned a very important point that the executive branch and the judicial branch, there is a constant struggle between both of them. We have also seen how this struggle has been on tariffs and on other aspects. I think we'll talk about it in a little time from now.
Right.
But Dr. Jordan, a 5-year-old child taken into custody, saying that he is an alien citizen, you
Yeah.
know, this is very
Yeah.
concerning.
Well, well, I don't know. There's a lot to talk about here. I think on the one hand, when I come on your show, when I start saying things that sound like anti-ICE, it seems like what I'm reacting to is just the present. And yeah, this is illegal, blah, 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 blah. But there's a whole narrative we can look at as what's happened in the United States, not just over the last 50 years, but over the last 200, right? 250 years. What is it that made the United States be what it is? And why is it in this position right now? And when you look, the young people working for ICE, I believe they're making somewhere between $60,000 to $140,000 a year, depending upon their experience. There's a five-figure amount that they're for giving college loans. They're giving sign-up bonuses. This is money that these young men can't make in the contemporary labor market at their age without a college degree. So we used to have unions in this country. And the advantage of the American union system is that if you graduated high school, you could get a job in the late 70s working in a union, making $17.50 an hour, pushing a broom at Barbara Green. And that was enough money for you to start a family, eventually buy a small home, save money, put your kids through college when universities were actually subsidized effectively by state governments. And the middle class of the United States was what I call getting its piece. It was getting its piece of the unbelievable amount of money flowing through the United States. And for the past 40, 50 years, we've dismantled the manufacturing union structure that allowed the middle class to get its piece. And this current generation of young people is very aware of how their economic situation is not the same. Their economic opportunities are not the same as those afforded their parents.
Right.
So, and that state, that position of these young people wasn't created just by Republicans. It wasn't created, it was an entire Congress that signed the treaty, signed NAFTA, free trade with China. And all those things allow manufacturing to flow out of the United States, which means once you sell your factory to another country, you don't hire those people to do those jobs anymore.
Right.
And the argument is, yeah, but stuff will go to China, it'll come back, it'll cost us less. Yeah, well, as it costs us less, we end up paying less for it, which means we're not supporting the middle class that used to be supported by those higher prices.
Right.
So I think what we're seeing here isn't something that just started with Trump, right? I think what we're seeing here is the chickens come home to roost after 50 years of neglecting and 50 years of creating a financial infrastructure that allows more and more of the wealth in the United States to flow through and to a smaller percentage of the population.
Right.
And so that situation makes the culture vulnerable to someone like Trump, just like the depression that Germany was put into after World War II by the Treaty of Versailles. That treaty and reparations demanded of Germany put the country in a depression. And when you put someone in a desperate financial state, you make them vulnerable to these types of things.
Right.
So our young people are vulnerable. And I think those are also the conditions that make someone like a Donald Trump more likely to become president. Mm-hmm. Because the advantage that Trump has is that he just says the loud part, the quiet part out loud all the time. 30 years ago, people wouldn't have tolerated, well, maybe they would have, God, I don't know. But I just don't sense when I was growing up that the kind of racism and sexism, just ruthless capitalism that he represents and just talks about freely would have ever made its way to be elected. The stuff that he's doing now, this can only happen because the Congress refuses to stop him.
Yes.
Right. So these people are staying in power because of the disenfranchised that Trump is appealing to. Now, all of this was within the system of democracy.
Right.
Democracy doesn't do anything to us by itself. We're the ones that manage democracy. How we behave with our wealth creates the possibilities for everyone in a democracy. And when we basically annihilate possibility after possibility for people with less money, mm-hmm. What do we think is going to happen? I mean, you're making people desperate, man. Right. Well, and so people do what they do in desperate situations. And then because we have a legal system, we blame it all on them and their choices. And it's much more systemic than individual choice.
Even Dr. Jordan, what I have, when I was researching for this conversation, and I was listening to the views of other people on this matter, the constant view that is coming into attention is that current administration is trying to sort of check how much far we can go. What are the limits of the executive power that we have? How are people going to react? When people don't react, I think they think that we can get away with such things like killing of US citizens. Where is the law protecting the US citizens from the US government?
Yeah.
That is such a contradictory statement in itself.
Well, there's one thing that I'm a little pleased to see my fellow Americans come to grips with. And that is that laws don't work because laws are supposed to work. Laws work because people enforce them.
Right.
When you get a subpoena to go in court and you don't show up, people come and get you, right? When you shoot someone, the police will come and stop you, right? In other words, laws don't work just because they're rational phenomena we created. Laws work because they're enforced.
Correct.
And a lot of people in my political, just call me a liberal, they just kind of lose track of the fact that these things don't work just because they're supposed to. They work because systems enforce them. And when you can undercut the system of enforcement, as is going on right now, you just ignore the judicial. You just, through executive order, come up with this whole new class of American citizen, pay them these outrageous wages. Who's going to stop you?
Right.
These things, slavery didn't stop because of laws. Slavery stopped because of the Civil War. And I'm not trying to be pro-violence. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm saying is to act as though, to just get disgusted because someone's breaking the law. It reveals to me that someone's never really fully understood how these laws work anyway.
Right.
And they work because they're enforced. And when you wrap your mind in, oh, I'm not violent, I'm anti-violence, and we should just use the laws, someone comes along and says, well, hell with you, I'm into violence. I'll make the violence work for me. And not be aware that that's where we are.
Mhm.
And then to let yourself kind of get played over 40 years to the point where someone can do this because your political party lets them come into power. What are you going to do when they come for you, man? What are you going to do when they come to your door, knock you down, and drag you away at gunpoint? I mean, these are the things that we unleash. This is Animal Farm. I mean, this is just everybody. This is in the air. But so I think we've made ourselves vulnerable to
Right. Right.
because we've been able to trust the
Yes.
judicial and the executive interaction. So
To add on to your point, Dr. Jordan, that that you are proud of your fellow Americans, that they are now trying to stand up to all this, what I should say is, sort of unlawful behavior and immoral behavior
yep,
in certain ways, that they are coming onto the roads, they are shutting down their shops and joining the protests happening
yep,
in and around the country. And if I recall correctly, one protest is also planned for March 28th. So
yeah,
I think when they have seen all these things, that if they're not going to step up and speak for themselves, nobody's going to speak. They have become more and more cautious and more aware about the fact that they need to come out. They need to tell to the administration that this is how we
yeah,
feel and these are your limits. And I think it has also started to see in the decision making of the top leadership. Like I was seeing the clip from the cabinet meeting that President Trump held recently. First of all, he did not take any
yeah.
questions from the press, which is very unlikely for him.
Ah,
And
right,
secondly, he did not mention the head of Homeland Security. Even once in the meeting, she
right,
was sitting on the very side of the table, and
right.
he did not mention. Otherwise, he mentions her very frequently.
Yeah,
So I think he's also trying to distance himself, especially after the justification that was given by the department, both on the killing of Alex Petrie and the arrest of 5-year-old, as we were discussing earlier.
right.
But I think there has to be some limitations, some boundaries when it comes to the power of ICE. They should not be allowed to go into somebody's home and break the door and get people,
Right,
smash the glass of the car in which a child is there sitting with his father. I think there has to be some
right.
limitations to how much excess power they can exercise.
So, so let's say I agree with you, and this should not happen. The thing is, it is, and it's happening because someone's betting that we're not going to get violent to stop it.
Right.
Violence is being thrown at the American public. And the thing is, we know we're not in checkmate, but we're definitely in check because the minute the public goes violent to stop it, you got the Insurrection Act. And then our only legal way of changing things is by voting in a new administration. That's 2 years away. Maybe in the midterms, we can vote in a new Congress, and then we can pass laws that will actually do these things, get things done. Again, this goes back to my point earlier. The word should isn't why this slavery ended.
Yeah.
I'm not calling for violence. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm calling for a steely-eyed understanding that these things don't enforce themselves. And there are plenty of times in the system. The system's actually set up. The police are set up to be able to back up laws with enforcement if through violence if necessary, right?
Right.
Doesn't mean, if they're going to come in your home, you've got to be a criminal, and a judge has to have signed off on a warrant that allows you to go into their home. And even then, you're not allowed to go in and shoot them. You're allowed to defend yourself if they, pose an imminent threat to your life. But other than that, you get them, you take them, and you go through our judicial process.
Right.
So we're confronted. If we're playing a game of chess, I think we're in a moment of check because someone's been able to push a boundary. And some of the things that are very satisfying. I understand that certain states are passing laws where people who are actually employed by ICE right now will never be able to get a law enforcement position in their state, right? So there are things that people are looking for any possible way that's nonviolent to create a context to deselect the desire or dampen the desire to become part of ICE. And I admire that's not my area of expertise. And I admire my fellow citizens who have their expertise and they're expressing it. My expertise is in experimental psychology. And when I talk to my students, I talk to them about the environmental constraints that can lead one to be vulnerable. Lead one to be vulnerable to the types of behaviors these young people are being encouraged to express.
Right.
And yeah, and just for me, stay away from the morality of it to some extent. These are nuts and bolts. People are being given guns. People are given uniforms and training and money to be in this place.
Right.
So what did we do as a culture that made them vulnerable to feeling that that's a good way to be a young person? And to act as though it's completely independent of us, that it's their choice, and they did it and they're at fault. For me, that's one of the failings of capitalism, right? The hyper-individualism underlying American capitalism that allows us to blame everybody's life circumstances on their choices, allows us to ignore the systemic structures that people actually become a person within.
Right.
And I think we're at a generational reckoning. And I'm optimistic as how it's going to play out.
Right. You were
Um,
mentioning that,
we'll see.
you were mentioning earlier that only way to deal with this situation is, when people vote this government out or in the midterms. But
Yeah.
I was reading somewhere, it was a meme piece that whichever, whosoever comes next into the presidential chair will spend most of his time apologizing from leaders around the world for what damage has been done until now.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm optimistic. Look at what Joe Biden did in the 4 years after he replaced Trump.
Yes.
Finland and Sweden joined NATO.
Yes.
Say what you want about Joe Biden. Dude understood good old-fashioned geopolitics,
Yes.
right? He understood how power works. He
Right.
understood that when you start doing stupid, mean things to your allies, your power structure, your power position in the globe diminishes. We're
Right.
not powerful just because we're the United States. We're powerful because we have allies all over the world, and
Yes.
we work with them. Well, of course, there's all kinds of crap that goes on between allies. That, of course, there is. Of course, the United States has been outspending NATO countries when it comes to sustaining NATO. Why? Because we become more powerful. We're paying to play. Good old-fashioned Machiavellian politics, right? But this idea that somehow we're being taken is such an uninformed, short-term view.
Absolutely.
And I believe that Europe, poor Greenland, right? I believe if we're able to get to the end of this administration and put, I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat, but someone that's got a longer term vision, understands power more than using his fists and bad words, understands that a smile is actually more powerful, right?
Okay.
That I don't think it will take too long. I mean, it didn't take long for the world to I think the world sees what we see, and the world sees that we have an anomaly. And what didn't get talked about a lot after Trump's first term is why was he elected? What, and it wasn't, and then everybody wants to blame, angry young men, or they want to blame, this or that. Well, why is it just about individual choice? What's different between the world that these young people are growing up in versus the world I grew up in? I grew up in a union town. Everybody owned a home. Everybody walked to their union job or drove to their union job. They made good money. They were getting their piece of the American pie, and they're not now. That's just pretty simple to me, right? And that means that I have something to do with why they're not getting their piece. I'm voting people into office to make sure that more of my money comes back to me. I'm doing things with my life that sustain this larger scale system in which these people grow up. Those are not the kind of questions we asked ourselves.
Right.
And this American focus on individual choice and individual action as the determining factor is just dangerous. And it's kind of made it easier for us to be where we are now.
Right. So, Dr. Jordan, you were mentioning earlier about how the whole NATO and Greenland situation is unfolding. Let me ask you in a similar tone again. When you heard that President Trump is considering military action or military options to, annex Greenland, which is a part of Denmark, which is a part of NATO, which US is a founding member, what sort of contradictory thoughts were coming into your mind at that point of time?
Honestly, I mean, let's just go back a little bit. Blowing up boats in Venezuela, blowing up boats because people are assumed to have drugs in them. You don't get to kill people just because they're breaking the law. That's not how it works.
Right.
The current president also has a habit of coming in strong on a particular topic. People aren't used to people coming in strong and aggressive on topics like that. And so it puts them it's disruptive, it surprises them. They need to take a moment to get their calm back and get into the moment. And then he says, well, let's make a deal. Well, no. I mean, you came in and threw a fit, and now you're telling us that we have to make a deal with you because you threw a fit. I'm kind of pleased to see NATO's response. You don't want to let Germany send tanks anywhere. Right? I mean, there's an old world wisdom in how these Europeans work, and so there's a lot of shadow moving through what we're talking about. So, for example, yeah, Greenland belongs to Denmark, but how did that happen? Well, colonizing, right? So Trump can always say, well, look how it was taken. We're just going to do that again and turn it into a thug world. Now, the difficulty we experience is that there's to a certain extent, it is a thug world. And, if the more powerful are going to use their power to get what they want, well, that's what they're still doing, right? If it's not, it's economic power, it's violence. So how do we then argue with a thug when we're thugs, right? How do we tell one thug your thuggery is wrong, my thuggery is better? And I'm not saying the United States is thugs, but what I'm saying is it's always been power, and I'm not Machiavellian, but I'm not so unaware that I think that the United States is what it is because it's rational and it's supposed to be that way. It's what it is because of how power was used. And I'm not anti power. I don't see power as the opposite of good. I don't see power as the opposite of rationality, right? I see rationality actually not transcending power, but actually being used in the service of power.
Right.
And then people come up with these wonderful narratives about how they're doing the good. I'm not going to disagree with any of that and deconstruct it. But what Trump's form of being does is force us to argue with our own shadows.
Right.
And the question is the more we pretend that we don't have those shadows, the more we just look and feel like hypocrites.
Right.
And I'm not at all congratulating Trump. What I'm doing is commenting on how did our culture let us get to this point, right? And I think we got to this point because we unleashed a generational power in our legal system regarding our financial infrastructure. It manipulated that infrastructure to the point where the unbelievable flows of wealth to a smaller number of people,
Yes.
Citizens United, allowed by the United States Supreme Court, allows anybody to contribute any amount of money they want to our elections, and they don't have to disclose who they are. What?
Yes.
Who does that? So
Even,
we
even
did
Dr.
that.
Jordan, even Dr. Jordan in India, we had an electoral bond scheme, which was something similar to what you are mentioning, that any amount of money can be given to any politician at any point of time in any election. And
Yeah,
and the Supreme Court here in India said that the system, by the very definition, was illegal because there was no tracking
yeah,
back and everything. So you're very
right.
right. And also you mentioned another important point that you were very pleased to see the response of NATO, how it sort of
Yeah,
put its guard high against the President Donald Trump's wishes to annex
yeah.
Greenland. And I think President Trump has come on back foot as well. After the meeting in Davos, he was saying that, okay, I have a framework, I have a deal that can be made, so no military and everything. So, after all, sending, military tanks and everything to Greenland worked out. Don't you think so?
So if I'm following your argument, yeah. In other words, people stood up to a bully,
Yes.
right? I mean, this is how bullies work. Give me your lunch money or I'm going to beat you up. Well, guess what? You're not getting my lunch money. And guess what? There's 50 of us. So what are you going to do, right? That's how you stand up to a bully. It's old-fashioned thuggery, but it's obvious, right?
Right.
And let's also understand a whole other world of shadow that's going on underneath this. Is the Epstein files.
So, yes.
How much of all of this is just subterfuge and distraction to find a way to keep him in office so that those files are never released? And who's at risk of those files coming? Who's at risk of those files being released? I don't think it's just Donald Trump, right? And so that shadow force is having a huge impact on people's willingness to sustain this tomfoolery he's generating across the world.
Right.
So, again, do I know that there are people in the Epstein files? No, I don't know. But I can sense the machinations of power. And it feels to me like power is being used in a way to keep that shadow hidden.
Right.
And I think world leaders can see it, and then they have to make their own choices, right? Are they gonna
But
what? How are? Go ahead, go ahead.
Dr. Jordan, a very interesting point you mentioned that so much is happening in the United States at this point of time. Many of it seems like a distraction from the main cause. There are names of big influential people in the Epstein files, not only from the US, but across the world. We have seen what happened to ex Prince Andrew, that he lost all his titles and everything,
Yes,
and how Trump's name keep on appearing in those files. Not only President
yeah,
Trump's name, but also the names of big billionaires, powerful people, people from the government, people from the
yeah,
society. So I think you're right in
yep,
some way. It could be a distraction, for us, for simple people like us to not pay
yeah.
attention to those aspects.
No, yeah. And the advantage for Trump is he's been a short-term player his whole career.
Yes.
So it doesn't seem out of the ordinary for him to do these short-term things.
Right.
So
Right.
maybe people aren't as quick to see it as a distraction. Um, but yeah, again, and then the question for me is, how the hell did we let ourselves get to this point,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so yeah,
So I think we were talking about the how current presidency, current US administration is alienating the allies that it had. So in the recent past, we have seen now the world has started evolving without the US. They're making
right.
trade deals where US is not part of the conversation. They are
Hmm.
making unions, they're doing summits where US is not playing the key role as it used to play,
Yep.
be it be policy making, be it be defense deals, business deals, or whatever. The very recent example I was reading is that both United Kingdom and Canada is going towards China to make business deals,
Yep.
not trade deals.
Yep.
The whole agenda of the United States to have strong friendship with partners in the Europe and partners across the world, be Asia, be it be with India and other countries,
Right.
was to minimize the impact that China could have on different countries. But now what we are seeing
Yes.
is that China is evolving as a more stronger player. Countries are pivoting towards China, and America is seemingly to be losing its advantage that it had over China.
Yes. I think one of the challenges faced by a lot of nation states is the United States was founded on a religious idea, right?
Okay.
And it was founded. The founders were of a religious group known as deism, and deism felt that the laws of God's plan could be found in the dynamics of nature. And so they felt that they found, at least the white landowners in the colonies, felt that they had found in the laws of nature uh, the natural right of all individuals to pursue truth, pursue truth. I don't know what the words are. Happiness, pursuit of happiness, blah, blah. And so when the British tried to enforce, no, we own you. You don't, you're a colony of us. The Americans said no, and they used violence to say no. But when people use violence, they usually have to come up with some cognitive system so they can gaslight themselves to tolerate the fact that they've caused this suffering. And a lot of these nation states have come to be through these divinely driven gaslighting structures, right? We are the one nation. We are chosen by God. If you look at some of the things going on in Japan in the late 1800s and the divin, divinely driven worldview that allowed Japan to experience itself as the leader of Asia against the West. Once you've got that, the challenge with that kind of thinking is it doesn't see reality as open. It sees reality as closed by divine will. And divine will says this. And what that does is it just allows you to be closed-minded. It allows you to think differently and to say, well, we're just divinely inspired. Of course, we're going to be it forever because we're not the best because we want to be the best. We're the best because God said we're the best. And what you get to do then is disconnect any suffering you generate in your desire to be the best from why you're the best. And you just enacting God's will. I mean, this is good old fashioned cognitive gaslighting, right?
Right.
And it's not that the current administration ever had a thought like that. It's just that Americans have gotten used to the idea. And they don't understand, which I think Joe Biden did. And I think the unbelievably qualified people that were working in the Biden administration knew power has to be tended to. Relationships have to be maintained actively. And that means you got to give something to get something. And that's not cynical. That's not Machiavellian. That's not trite. It's just how reality works. You
Yes.
got to do work to get energy out of the world. That's all there is to it. So um, I just don't think the current administration has a big picture understanding of how reality works.
Right.
And um, the United States wasn't a leading economic military force in the world because it was supposed to be,
Right.
right? And everything that the history of the United States set up across the world was always dependent on context, was not was not inherent in the structure of reality. It had to be worked at to be sustained.
Right.
And this current administration has given up on that work.
Right.
And it's somehow believing that I don't even think there's a big thought about all of it. To be honest, it's just like someone who's been victimized. Their scope of imagination is going to collapse into their own suffering, and then they're going to thrash out at the world, lash out at the world based on their suffering, without taking a big picture, without caring about the American public, without caring about the world public.
Right.
And we're just seeing it play out. So yeah, there's nothing predetermined.
Dr.
That's
Jordan?
why civilizations rise and fall all the time, right?
Right, right. Actually, you are very right on this. There was a time when every international conversation was used to go through the doors of Washington, but now
Yeah,
people are shifting towards new alliances. See, European Union and India were struggling to make a trade deal from last 2 decades, from last 20 years. But
yeah,
what Trump tariffs did was to bring these two countries, these two, unions together, European Union and India,
right,
and now
right,
everybody is making trade deals without US. And I think
yeah,
they're going to be that student in the class who is pushed towards the very corner because they are not willing to talk to anybody or willing to
yeah,
entertain anybody's interest. And as you mentioned, the interests, the geopolitical equations and
yeah,
geopolitical relationships have to be tended to. You have to
yes,
invest in them. If you're paying
yes,
certain set of amount to sort of help NATO to level up their defenses, you're actually investing in
yeah,
the relationship, not in the countries.
exactly. And
Right.
you're also investing in your own power and influence.
Yes, yes,
You
because
got to pay to play. Yeah,
yes, as you mentioned earlier, that is how America has gained its influence over the years. It was
yeah,
bringing the countries with similar thought process together and using their financial economic leverage to keep them closer.
yes. And I mean, my generation grew up. So I grew up during the Cold War, right? And I was actually in the military up through 1991.
Wow.
And yeah, our mission was kind of baked into the idea of keeping the world safe from communism, right? From the Soviet Union. Um, so I do believe that there's something fundamentally different in the respective individual agency that goes on in American democracy as opposed to what goes on in China.
Right.
Um, I do believe that. And do I believe that it's worth fighting for? I would kind of say yes, right? So there was something we were selling. We believed there was something we were selling other than just power, right? We believed that we were selling a different way of life
Yes.
that had a higher regard for individual agency. Um, and I believe the world somewhat responded to that idea. I think there were some countries and cultures that were sort of tired of monarchical ways of life, that wanted the sort of individual agency that comes with a healthy middle class, right? And I think they invested, and I think they listened to the United States, and the United States invested in them.
I think
Yeah.
the reason, as you were talking about capitalism earlier, the consolidation of wealth into the hands of a fewer people has gone against the very idea of sustaining the middle class. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then on top of that, you have eight cuts by the current administration and all sorts of cuts in the budget to various agencies and organizations that are responsible for the very basic, ensuring very basic things to the
Yeah.
marginalized section of the society. But Dr. Jordan, the decision of current government to withdraw from international organizations, like if I have to give you a number, 66 withdrawals have been made, and out of them 31 were the UN bodies, United Nations body. And we see after that President Trump has established his own board of peace. How do you look at this? Do you think it is something that will sustain in the long term, the board of peace? And how
No.
do you see the withdrawal from the international organizations?
So the world's laughing at us.
Yes.
Um, you can join my private club for $1 billion. Come on. I mean, this is why, you know, I'm borrowing a phrase from a dear friend of mine. Trump is the living embodiment of American shadow, right? I mean, his way of being in the world, selling favor at the individual level, trying to muster power and influence through individual dynamics. Um, it could be the case that in the end, that is how the world works. It could be that highly charismatic leaders and that individual flair, Barack Obama, end up being connected to power structures that allow them to have huge impacts on how the world works. I would never deny that. The thing is, when you're mean to people, they they learn avoidance responses to you. When you're nice to people, they learn approach responses. And who's signing up for this thing he's creating? I forget what it's even called now, or you got to pay $1 billion to get in. I mean, do other countries have to pay tribute to the U.S. to be in a relationship with the U.S.? Now, one could say no, and then I think that's a dangerous move. No one gets to be friends with any country just because we're going to be friends,
Yes.
right? There's an exchange of something. So when the United States is giving aid to a country, we can sit here and say we're just giving away stuff, but we're also getting a lot of psychic income about being a good country when we're in a position to be able to give to another group. The irony of giving culture, it's not the giver that does, it's not the giver that's paying honor. It's the receiver who's receiving and paying honor to the giver. The receiver is creating a space for the giver to be honorable. Now, I know that sounds backwards or whatever, but the idea that honor is an individual trait is just silly. I'm honorable to the extent that I carry myself in my world, my social world, a certain way. So I can't be honorable. I can't be an honorable hermit. You know, I can go out in the forest and live by myself, but honor comes from how you are in the world with other people, other organisms, etc.
Right.
So it's the receiver that does the honoring in a wealthy culture like the United States. So
Right.
we were getting things as we were giving aid to other countries. We were receiving the ability to be honorable. And we could, oh, that's just so pie in the sky. No, man, that's positive power. That's how positive power works. And people telling you, oh, you're doing a great job. We appreciate everything you did for Europe after World War II. Oh, we appreciate all the money you're sending to Africa.
Right.
Those are positive vibes. Those are goodwill. And they don't come because you're supposed to get them because you're a good person. They come because you behave a certain way in the world.
Right.
And I don't think the current administration has that understanding of relationships and honor. So
And
I
I
have to make sure that someone gives me
Yes, and I think
uh,
there are two
Nobel Peace
branches to
Prize.
what you are saying, two branches to what you're mentioning here. That one is when we study the rules of power in management, we are told that the moral power is the biggest power that you can hold in any set of society. It is not about the financial power or the political power, but the moral power that gives you the ultimate supremacy over anybody. That is number
Yeah,
one thing. And number two thing, when you help somebody, you inherently gets a favor from that particular person or that particular country, which you
yeah,
can any way anytime in future can materialize, and they will have to honor that thing. And
yeah.
I think this is something that if this approach to maintain diplomacy and maintain geopolitical relations continue, will be damaged in the long run. The ability to ask some country to do certain things and their willingness to do it, because you have not done
Yeah.
anything for them, why will they do anything for you in return?
Well, again, this is where being educated about history matters, all right? Because the only time NATO's been activated is when they helped us after 9/11,
Yes.
right? I mean, and that fact is out there. And the fact that you can say they've never helped us, that's just a sign of ignorance.
Yes.
It's a sign of being uninformed. And there's no one in the administration that is say, dude, well, you can't say that, man. You know, Um, and then he says those things, and people in Congress don't call him on it from a certain party. I mean, it just becomes obvious to anybody who's sensitive to the machinations of power
Right.
how this is all working, and it's real. I think it's less sophisticated than we can be. I think it's power from top to bottom forever. So I'm not a pie in the sky.
Now, I also want to know and understand your opinion on how the state of economy is in the United States of America. Let's start with the question on the freedom of U.S. Federal Reserve. Uh, the recent criminal charges on the U.S. Fed head, the chief of U.S. Fed, Powell. How do you see it? Do you say it's a pressure tactic, or what's your understanding of this whole matter?
So I'm not an expert in law. I'm not an expert in finance, but I think I can sense the machinations of power. And it's pretty obvious what's going on. When people say that the current president has sort of weaponized, Department of Justice, he's got his own people in the office. This is why this stuff wasn't possible in his first term, because the people that were at the levers of power in these other agencies weren't his people, right? And so there were checks and balances. And there were people that said no, and there were people who fired or left because they said no. And now he's come back and he's in a position to be able to get his own people in those positions. So, um, yeah, it's just pretty obvious to me. I don't have a whole lot more. I don't have anything much more sophisticated to say than
Right.
that, right? It's pretty obvious. He's got a rather non-sophisticated notion of power, and he's using it,
Yeah.
and he's not being resisted by the systems that wouldn't traditionally resist him. So,
Yeah.
yes, we're stuck with that for now.
Although heads of different federal banks across the world have written in support of Powell that the action against him is more of a power tactic to make him do what President Trump wants to do. But it comes to your observation once again that the checks and balances are getting compromised because of the generals of Trump being in place there. So that's
Yeah.
very nice. That's very right. And also, I want to know your understanding of when you go to market, when you talk to young people, when you talk to your colleagues across the board. Do you sense a feeling that they're concerned about the economy, that they're concerned about rising inflation, increasing debt on the US economy, rising unemployment? Is it the general course of discussion in the country, or people are talking less about it and they're less concerned about it?
So, in terms of young people, I speak with my kids more than anybody else, and when I do have the opportunity to speak to college students, right, I get a sense they're very aware that the economic possibility space of the culture has dramatically changed. When private organizations are buying up homes in neighborhoods, not to move into them, but just to own them, uh, that has impacts on how those houses move in a housing market. That wasn't the case 30 years ago. It just it wasn't the housing market I went and bought my first home in, right? And so um, the cost of college education, right? I'm a college professor, and when I went to a state university, I'm not going to say the year, but I went to a state university a long time ago, and I suspect 70% of that university's budget was funded by dollars from the state government. I work for a university in Illinois now, where, as I understand it, 14% of our budget is funded by the state. So how do we get from 70 to 14%? Well, we do that over 50 years. And like the frog on the pot of water, we just don't sense that it's about to boil, right? But you
Right.
tell a young person now they've got to take out an $80,000 loan to go to school for 4 years. I didn't have to do that. But you tell them they have to, and you recognize that that's a mortgage on a very small house, but it's still a mortgage. They have to take out a mortgage, or their parents have to come up with the size of a small mortgage to get their kids into the middle class through the college route. when the union route is no longer there, um, it's a different world of economic possibilities for the young people, and they're very aware of it. I don't sense a whole lot of despair. What I do sense is, well, we'll live our lives differently. So a rise in the small home market, right? Very, very small micro homes, right? Where people are actually, okay, I'll invest a little less of my money in a lot less of my money in the place I live, but that opens up my budget to actually being more of a traveler, yeah, other sorts of things.
Right.
But this college debt, man, it cripples these kids, right? It just cripples their economic opportunities and it follows them until it's paid off. And it's kind of sick. It's kind of sick because it's an old form of money, lending money to younger people, putting them in debt. While people are making money off of these young people trying to make their way into
Right.
the middle class. I am not a fan.
I think the capitalization of the education sector is the worst thing that can happen to any country, because when education becomes out of the pocket for anybody, the society is coherently doomed to fall into the pothole, because
Yeah.
because they are no longer going to get the education, they're no longer going to understand how the work and how the systems work in the real system. And
And
also
they're
you
not going to, go ahead, they're not going to believe in upward mobility.
yes,
Right? They're not going to believe that you can live a life like I did, where you come from the middle class and you keep doing things, you keep doing things, and you keep quote unquote moving up or whatever, right? Because the systems that afford that moving up
right.
um, don't exist the way they used to 30 years ago. Now, I'm not an economics expert, so I'm sure there's plenty of people out in the business world that can tell me I'm full of it. I, that's just not the way I see it, and not the way I feel it. So I'll leave it at that.
And my understanding has been, even in India, and I've seen across many countries as well, when I talk to people from different set of
Yeah.
society and different set of profession, this whole system, you pull out a loan and you go to college, then you spend maybe next 5 to 10 years of life paying off that loan, is nothing but forcing them into corporate slavery. Maybe they don't want to quit, you know.
Yeah, I I I could sit here and grieve for an hour about how I think cultural pressures from an older generation are changing the context of how young people come to be in America. And I think we're seeing the consequences, right?
Right, right,
Everybody thought NAFTA would be a great thing. And I'm not saying it wasn't. It's just the financial possibilities of the American middle class don't seem to be the same as they were.
right,
And it's, I don't like to despair, right? So I do see the creative energy of young people, and I see them organizing themselves around these constraints, just like I organized myself around the constraints of my world when I was their age. Um,
right,
it's just quite disappointing that the wealthiest nation on the planet has to force kids into debt to go to college. And
right,
some say, well, they should just go to the workforce. And it's like, what workforce? What middle class are you actually asking them to become part of?
right,
And is that the middle class that you were invited to be part of 30 or 40 years ago? And I'm going to say the answer is no. Now, I'm sure there are economists and others who will say, well, yeah, you're wrong. That's okay, wrong. But this is what I've lived. I lived in a middle class neighborhood where everybody had a house and they all worked at unions within 5 miles of the house and they all had money. They could send their kids to college if they wanted to. And of course, it would be state college. It wouldn't be private college. You'd have to take out money and loans to do that stuff. But that whole thing has become quite different.
right,
And I find that disappointing. We could have done what I would respect more, and
right.
we haven't. So I'll leave it at that.
And that's very right, Dr. Jordan. Being powerful and being wealthy nation is not about just how much wealth do you have. It's about how much you can give back to the people who have helped you accumulate that wealth over the period of time. I think that's the That should be the main definition of wealth. Even in India, we are struggling with this. All the wealth is consolidated into the hands of certain people,
Right.
and the governments and all the organizations are inherently becoming dependent on those people to sustain
Yeah.
things of the society. But let me now move this conversation towards the conclusion and take your opinion on the changing perception of the world when it comes to United States of America. We know that the approval rating of President Donald Trump is getting down and down and down, and it
Yeah.
becomes to a level where it is all-time low, and then it goes down further below. And then
Yeah.
on top of that, you have the actions like arresting journalists and arresting people who try to speak to the power and try to ask the difficult questions. How do you look at such situation where the freedom of speech and all these things are coming into a question?
Well, once again, disappointing. Um, People came from all over the world to
Right.
be in the United States, to get an education in the United States, to get a job in the United States, because it was so incredibly dynamically exciting, right? It was a place where you could go struggle with your ideas, and you, the president wasn't allowed to just do what he wanted because he was constrained by Congress. He was constrained by or he or she was constrained by the Supreme Court. And yes, living in it, you get tired of the constant argument. But what you don't do is take a moment to say, God, this is so much better than having a king. Can we tolerate what it takes to actually be organized by the rule of law? Can we live with the complexities of those arguments all the time? Or do we just collapse into simplicity and say, I'm tired of this crap. I just wish someone were in charge and would tell everybody what to do. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing is people who are tired, who feel like they're being marginalized, and these arguments, they don't make any sense, right? Why can't you just cut a check and send it to me? Why can't it just be that simple? And I'm not trying to beat up on anybody or anything like that, but one thing we didn't do was revel in the fact that we were arguing as a culture about how these things are supposed to happen. We have to take pride in that, instead of like getting bored of the argument. And I think we've kind of lost that. I don't want to say we ever had it. I don't know. It's just, how do we celebrate the fact that we look complicated? We look like we're constantly arguing with each other,
And there's a very
and
famous saying,
we haven't celebrated it.
right, Dr. Jordan. And there's a very famous saying about it, and even in India, it is often quoted by the top people that democracy has its own flaws, has its own limitations. But do
Yeah,
we want dictatorship? You know?
right. No, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what Barack Obama put together the National Health Care Act,
Yes.
which he also made it law that children were able to stay on their parents' insurance policies until they were 26, if I believe. And so one of the interesting things that I noticed when that was happening was when Obama was selling the idea of this healthcare system, he was selling it financially. This will bring down costs. You'll keep people out of the emergency room. And what I'm not blaming him, but what I found disappointing was obviously there's enough money in the country to do this. This is not a financial argument.
Right.
This is an argument about the kind of person you want to be, about the kind of culture you want it to be. And what I tell people is this, right? So, how would you feel if you found out that the family living next to you wasn't going to have to sell their house and move because tax dollars that you contribute are actually helping them sustain the health of their kids? Isn't that cool? Now imagine that family living 3 blocks away. Now imagine them living 30 blocks away, 3 miles away, 300 miles away. Wouldn't it be cool if the money you spend out of your check right now actually helps keep all those people healthy? Wouldn't that just make you a badass? I don't hear any of this going on and we talk about each other politically anymore. And this idea of of respecting yourself because you're part of something bigger than yourself. And small things that you do with money you have actually goes to make this a better place. I I just don't see a lot of that kind of argument going on anymore. And I'm sure it's happening and I just don't see it because I'm in my own part of the computer world, right? But the healthcare bill didn't have to be sold as a financial thing. Now laws have to be passed to make sure who's going to pay for it. But guys, man, it's the wealthiest country that ever existed. How is that a problem? Just sort out the details, take the money from those that have it. I'm sorry, that sounds woof, but we had the legal potential to be able to do that, enforce it, make it happen,
Yes.
and then praise the country for its willingness to help everyone be better off. I don't, Barack Obama, maybe Joe Biden to an extent, I don't know, but so yeah, if you're gonna, yeah, I'll stop there.
No, no. But that is a basic necessity, Dr. Jordan. That is not something which should be sold like the way you are saying it has been sold, but like something which is done on the moral grounds because everybody deserves it. It is not because you are doing something over the top. It is the very basic and minimal thing that needs to be done.
Yes, and and there was an American senator, S.I. Hayakawa. He was the senator from Hawaii, and he was a while back, and he wrote this little book called Language in Thought and Action. It's a very small book, and I used to teach a course thought and language. It was a cognitive science course, and I'd have the students read that book. And he starts off with some insights that we don't pay attention to. He says, look, we see each other on the news arguing all the time, and it makes us believe that we're arguing more than we're cooperating. But it's just not the case. Everybody stops at stoplights, right? Everybody, all the cooperation that has to go on in the world for two people to be shown arguing with each other, the cooperation to argumentation ratio is ridiculous. There's so much cooperation going on every day, and yet we focus on the small level of argument that's going on. So he said, pay attention to your world. You're participating in a lot of cooperation. Second thing he said was, let's suppose you have a town and it extracts money from all the citizens, on a monthly basis, and a family loses, the father or parents lose their jobs. How does the town react to it? Well, what one town does is actually celebrate these people because they get to be the recipients of our gifts. In other words, the receiver does the honoring, not the giver. It's the receiver that honors the giver's ability to help. And he said, versus another country which tells them, oh, you're weak, you're lazy, you're stupid. Now you got to pull on public resources.
Yeah.
We've completely given up on the ability to feel honored through our tax dollars. And it's we've been led to this way of believing because we've been watching the arguments. We've not had a rhetoric of praising cooperation. I mean, Obama gets close to it with the idea that you are your brother's keeper. And but don't use that. We often use that kind of language to beat people over the head, as opposed to let's just celebrate the fact that we can help each other, man.
Right.
That's cool.
I think that's a privilege. That's the ultimate
So
privilege.
anyway, I know I sound like a pie in the sky liberal, but
No.
Go ahead.
That's so right, Dr. Jordan. It's the
Go ahead, I'm
ultimate
sorry.
privilege. It's the ultimate privilege that we could step out and help somebody. Not everybody gets that privilege in today's world. And even, I follow religious things very seriously. And one of the constant idea across all the religions is to be a giver, not to be a taker. And to give is the ultimate privilege. And not everybody has that privilege. And whosoever has it should respect it and take it seriously. Not about, not feel macho about it, but feel humbled about it and full of gratitude about it. But Dr. Jordan, what's your opinion on?
No, exactly.
So Dr. Jordan, what's your opinion on President Trump getting Nobel Peace Prize?
Embarrassment? Um, Look, I'm not going to say there aren't any power dynamics involved in who gets a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm just not, it's not how I see the world. Power's everywhere. The thing is, the last thing you want people, this is just purely Machiavellian thinking on my part. The last thing you want to do is if you want to be a leader, the last thing you want the world to do is see you begging for an award. It just makes you look small. It doesn't make you look like a leader. If
Yes.
you're a leader and our awards are involved, have I gotten awards? Yes. Do I like getting awards? Yes, I do. But what you're not going to see me is begging the world for them. I'm not going to beg the world to give me an acknowledgement. The bigger payoff is when someone says, hey, you deserve an award. Here's an award. And you can say, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm deeply honored, blah, 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 blah. But to go around begging for it is not noble. It's not honorable. And it's just diagnostic of the way a certain cognitive structure works. And I'm not going to judge it. I'm just going to observe it and say that's not the way
It
honor
yes.
goes about getting awards. Yeah.
Yes. And it makes you a lot of it makes you needy on the global stage that you need certain award to do something. I mean, it is ridiculous.
So it was the opposition leader in Venezuela, if I'm not mistaken, who
Yes.
gave Trump her Nobel Peace Prize. That is such a gangster move. She knew exactly what she was doing. You know what I'm saying? And the
Yes.
whole world, I mean, I would say 70% of the world was in on the joke. And it was brutal. It was a brutal joke. It's the best of comedy. And I don't know that a lot of people got it. And that was amazing. That was better than watching a good comedy. It was,
I
oh my
cannot.
God.
I was sitting with somebody when I opened my Instagram and I came to know about this news and I started laughing at same point of time. And I
Oh
thought
my God.
the Nobel Peace Committee would be thinking to whom we have given the Nobel Peace Prize. We should have given it
Oh
to President Trump directly if this is something which was going to happen.
Uh, oh my God. And then now there's a whole world of memes
Yes.
about other people with awards giving them over to him. Oh, it's just the internet wins, man. And when it comes to satire, it wins. And so yeah, it's embarrassing. I mean, like I said, I don't doubt that there are power machinations involved and who gets the Nobel Peace Prize. That doesn't bother me. I don't look at the world as a pure place of rational goodness, and it doesn't make me cynical. I just love the muck and mire and the work we have to do to exist in the reality of muck and mire. Try to find honor in it. Try to find dignity in it, right? And I don't look at honor and dignity as should be values. They don't exist because they should. They exist because we work to make them possible.
Right.
And one of the challenges of contemporary Western thinking is no, these are things that should be. Well, no, because once you believe these things should be or are supposed to be, you stop working for them. Because if they don't happen, you can just say, well, they were supposed to be that way. No, we want them to be that way. And so, let's do the work it takes to make honor possible. And if it takes negotiation, then it takes negotiation. It's just this life, man.
And Dr. Jordan, the joke did not stop there. President Trump's go a step ahead and leak the private conversation that he has with leaders, across the world. That is even more embarrassing that now every time you send President Trump a message, you have to be very careful that I don't know whether I will be all over the news
All
in the
right.
morning or not.
Let me just say something to the entire world. Don't ever send anything out into the information universe that you don't want someone else to know.
Yes.
Play the game a little more closer to the chest and just keep your powder dry. And don't acquiesce, don't take the knee, don't make threats in the e-verse because they're going to show back up, right? Learn how to manage yourself in ways that are, and that whole thing, I think as an American, one of the moments that hurt me the most was when during the first term, he invited Russian diplomats into the Oval Office and kicked out everyone else, I thought I had really, really intense emotional reactions to that. And then I just knew this is this the beginning of the end, right? I mean, God, when we got to the next election and Biden was president, I'm not sure. I don't remember if I cried or not.
Mm.
Um, but yeah. Um,
But now they have a picture of President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in White House as well. That shows a whole new ideology happening,
yeah.
in the country.
Well, yeah, and he got played by Putin, right?
Yes, I
Right.
totally agree with you on that. Totally. He met President Putin. He did not get anything in return. And yet President Putin is bombing Ukraine and doing all stuff that he used to do earlier. Nothing has changed. The only thing
No.
that has changed is that President Trump has stopped talking about Ukraine the way he used to.
Yes. I mean, I don't know. I'm just looking at it from an old world power dynamic. And did you gain any power?
Hmm.
And the answer is no. All right, then move on to something. I just, yeah, just the
Right.
United States can be more sophisticated.
Right. Just I'll take a quick reaction from you on one of the last, point that
Yeah.
I had on my conversation. Is President Trump's potential third term?
Yeah.
Number one, do you think that is possible? Legally it is not possible, but definitely, do you think that there
All
is
right.
some minute possibility? And number two, what would world be like under President Trump's third presidency if it happens?
So since the term limits are, okay, I'm going to embarrass myself. I'm not an expert in law, but my understanding is that term limits are part of the Constitution, right?
Right, that's correct.
Which means in order to overrule aspects of the Constitution needed an unbelievable majority in Congress. Again, I'm not sure of all the machinations, but I believe I know that it's extremely difficult to add to the Constitution or to change it. And it's definitely a logical possibility. That's a philosophical concept that it means that if everybody in the Congress were to vote for it, as
And
I understand the system, it's logically possible. Will it happen? Um, I don't think so. I think if he were to stay on as president, it would come through the insurrection. Um, but then there are people that know a lot more about this than I do. So if you've got people that are watching this and they're listening to my answer, please go to the Google machine and you can find things that are much more precise than I am about Trump in a third term. Um,
but won't that be a disaster, Dr. Jordan, if he gets a third term? Because in his second term already he has done damage beyond repair, what I believe.
all right, so let me just be honest. I don't blame Trump for Trump being president.
Okay.
He was voted into the presidency by the American public. So the question is how on God's earth did our system get to the point where the shadow is in charge, right? How did that happen? And if we don't look at that, then we're not going to be able to address how reorganize all this, how the shadows influencing culture. And so if he gets a third term, it's not his fault.
Right. But we hope he
And
won't, and constitutional prejudice stays in its place. And
yeah,
as you mentioned, it is very difficult. It is actually very difficult. And hypothetically, everything is possible. But if we consider the rules, regulations, and the real practical thing that he needs to make it happen, it's next to impossible. It's so much
yeah.
safer.
And
But
go ahead.
but the only idea is very fascinating that somebody can even present that idea who has already gotten two terms, and that also after being a convicted felon in the United States.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, if a third term does happen, um, the changes we're experiencing in the global economy will continue.
right, right,
And I do suspect the United States will increasingly find itself alone in international issues. Um, and then we'll just have to, I look at the universe as open, right? And so I can't say Trump getting a third term would make the United States quote unquote worse, but I'm not going to say it would make it better.
Right.
But I'm open to, I don't want it to happen, and I thought we have legal structures in place, but I also thought we had legal structures in place that would prevent someone from creating basically a nationalized military force that's going into American cities wearing masks and killing citizens. I thought we had legal structures in place to stop that. The courts have ruled this to be, in violation of law, and it continues. So,
But
I would suspect more of the same.
But I think, as you were mentioning earlier, the only way to look forward is full of optimism and hope. And
Yeah.
I think things will get better, and especially in the areas of Minnesota, Minneapolis, and other areas where immigration crackdown is taking the lives of people. American
Yes.
citizens, I want to highlight that point. American citizens without any criminal record.
Yeah.
That has to be put into the bold letters.
Yeah.
I really hope that things turn out good in the United States of America and they find themselves back into the position that they were, and people become more and more aware about what is happening, and more people like you, voice their concerns and voice their opinions. And I'm very grateful to you, Dr. Jordan, for accepting my invitation and talking so freely and letting your views, come into this
Right.
meet.
No,
And
you're very, very kind, and I appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate the opportunity to quote unquote express my views.
right.
There will be some who could hear my views and have very negative opinions of what I've said. I grew up in the United States where I could do this, and there are people putting their bodies between people, and I'm not doing that. So, what are we going to do, right? So, thank you for the opportunity, and I just want to make it clear that when I say I don't blame Trump for being the president, that doesn't mean that I respect what he does. He's the president because of reasons that are not completely dissimilar from why Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. It's put people in financially disparate situations. They will do things that they may not have done if they had a more lively economic outlook. So, yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Wonderful, Dr. Jordan, and I hope we'll catch up very soon later when things are better, actually better.
Yes. I think things will be more coherent. That's the way I talk. I think I'm optimistic, and that's just by default. And I am optimistic that things will become increasingly coherent in the next few years. We'll see.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Jordan, and thank you very much for giving me your time. I know it's way more valuable, but thank you very much.
No, please. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.